Hey team, welcome back to another incredible episode of the Intentional Agribusiness Leader podcast. This is your host, Mark Jewell, and today I am joined by Martha Schlicher. She is the CEO of Impetus, and I'm excited to dive into this because we got a little startup on our hands today that's doing something exciting in a world that I know if you're in ag retail, if you're out there working with the things that kind of keep this industry going, they're working on a solution to keep it going even further. And I'm sure we'll learn a little bit more about that here in a minute. But Martha, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mark.
You get the same opening question everybody gets. Martha, what does it mean for you to be intentional?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, CEO of an agricultural startup, involved in starting many agricultural startups and kind of shepherding them along. So what I say to everybody in the startup world is like every day and every dollar matters. So that is very much what being intentional means to me, is I have to think about how I'm spending every day, how I'm spending every dollar to create incremental value for the company, for ultimately growers and for investors. So it makes it very clear.
I feel like that's just a good analogy for life.
Yeah, probably. Probably should be. I think, you can be in big corporate America, or you can be in certain kinds of jobs where you'd be better off if you had that attitude.
Yeah, well, I think, if we just treated every day like it's startup life and we've got to maximize the value to get the maximum return on this thing, then, golly, it's then every day and every dollar counts.
Yeah, pretty clear. Yeah, you live with guilt.
Yes, of course. Well, talk to us a little bit about Impetus and your background and what brought you here and what you guys are up to.
Yeah, so start with my background because it's kind of relevant. So majority of my career at Monsanto, fortunate to start at the bench, and then, like many in Monsanto, made my way through a lot of different management roles, a lot developing new technologies, working with growers on new solutions. And one of the big ones was the introduction of biotech crops, right, which Monsanto is well known for, both on the herbicide side, but also on the insect side. So worked with many people on the development of insect control traits that were based on Bt proteins, naturally occurring proteins in the soil, that were very effective when incorporated into corn, cotton, and soybeans, and providing season-long control of crop-damaging insects. And there have been multiple generations of those products. Crafty insects have developed resistance to each generation. And sadly, the consolidation of the industry, there have just been a lack of new solutions in their development pipelines. And so they're really running out of options. And that leaves growers in a pretty difficult spot, especially growers in Brazil, but it's certainly going to move to North America. You now have fall armyworm, a really devastating crop damaging insect, billions of dollars a year in damage, that has developed this resistance and will no longer be controlled by these fantastic Bt traits. So we have a way of redirecting those Bt traits to new receptors on the gut of the insect and restore the activity. So we can do that in an interim way to try to provide near-term solutions to growers, which would be via a spray in the field over those biotech crops, but also long-term then with the introduction of a pipeline of enhanced Bt traits for continued, control of those insects in their fields. The other thing that's exciting about it is, especially for that, what we call a topical trait, to spray it over existing biotech crops, a grower, a retailer isn't beholden to big ag or a seed company. Those are products that could be made available much more broadly in the marketplace, and also with a great deal of flexibility. You spray it if you need it, you spray what you need for what insects, and you don't spray if you don't need it. But has the same benefits that a biotech crop has, of no residue on the crop, no concerns about worker safety, and so on.
Yeah, well, fantastic. Well, it's really incredible work that you guys are doing. And I was going to ask what was different in South America versus what's happening here. Is it just that particular species of worm?
Well, there's a few challenges. So in the U.S., these Bt traits were introduced in corn and in cotton, but not in soybeans.
Mm-hmm.
In Latin America, they were introduced in both corn and soybeans. So the insects get to essentially feed year round with a rotation pattern down there. And the same BT is put in both of those. So that allows the resistance to develop much more quickly. There's no right winter. They're in both corn and soybeans. And so the resistance just evolves much more rapidly.
Gotcha. Gotcha. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Well, serves them right, so to speak, for competing with us on those soybeans and driving our costs. Yeah, I say that sarcastically, of course. None of us wants to have to deal with that, but we're dealing with it, and you guys are coming up with a solution,
Yeah.
which I think, from an intentional leadership perspective, is one of the most intentional things we can do. It's intentional leaders are innovative. We're looking for ways to come up with to find the problems that exist and then solve and come up with creative solutions to do so. Is the current political environment, is that with all the things that we do out of DC, does that work in favor of what you guys are doing or against it? How does that play into your purview?
Yeah, well, maybe to tie even back into your previous questions. So we, of course, are a US based company, so we're always interested in developing and introducing our technology here first.
Mm-hmm.
There has been quite a bit of development in China of trying to develop new biotech traits for introduction in Brazil first, because they're trying to preserve that soybean supply now going from Brazil into China instead of from the US. And they are actually doing it in a way that isn't, I will say, very intentional and thus not very good stewardship.
Mm-hmm.
So it won't be different traits with different modes of action. It won't be kind of a 1-2 punch. So the things they're doing there to ensure that food supply are going to have negative ramifications for us much more broadly than having China as an export market. It could also then impede and cause further limiting of the tools and solutions. So all the more reason why we in this startup world have to be aggressive about developing these new technologies for our US growers.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Wow. Yeah, I can see how the cascading, what do they call it, the law of unintended consequences.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, just the cascading effect.
On the broader implications, certainly we're dependent on U.S. regulatory agencies, the USDA,
Mm-hmm.
the EPA, and so fortunately our product has decades of demonstrated safety. There's never been a single safety incident with BT before, and so we believe we're providing them with a solution that makes it easy for them to approve our products because of their familiarity versus something that's entirely new and they have no familiarity with.
Yeah.
We'll have to go through the process. Of course, resources are constrained there, but we're trying to set ourselves up that we're advantaged in that area.
You bet. Yeah, super interesting. What stage are you at? Are these things in the market yet today? We're still getting them to market. Where are we at?
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
really at the greenhouse stage now. So
Okay.
we're selecting kind of our lead actives and demonstration in the greenhouse will then allow us hopefully to go to the field next year. Field requires more money. So, we'll be out looking to generate additional investment dollars so that we're able to do that.
Yeah. Yep. You bet. And then running some trials, I assume.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. I'll have to connect you with Kevin Hikes from Intent if you don't know him already. But
I
he's a
do
good,
know him. That's
you
also
do
a
know
St.
Kevin.
Louis based company.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, we just had him on a couple weeks ago on the podcast, and he's a friend of mine, and we were just talking about how they're helping get these trials out, into the market and get them done with more efficiency and a higher likelihood of completion and things like that. So it's been
Yeah,
cool. Yeah.
yeah. They have some great data resources for you. And yeah, another hat I wear as an investor at Biogenerator Ventures. We're a small nonprofit venture arm that works to start new agricultural startups and try to help ensure they're successful. And so we're also an investor in that company.
Wow, really cool. Very cool. Love it. Well, I want to get into some of these other questions because you've been through some really fascinating, uh, I mean, really from a historical perspective in the ag industry, some really influential times being at Monsanto when you were there, being on the teams that you were a part of while you were there, now being in the startup space that's, building new businesses off, in large part because of some of the things that were created there. So, talk a little bit about, first, let's start with this. Talk a little bit about startup culture. So you're building your team, and I love the name Impetus, by the way, because and so maybe there's something behind that plays into your culture. I'm curious, but talk a little bit about like what is it like now being in startup culture, and then let's work to compare and contrast that with being part of a large corporation.
Yeah. Well, as I said initially, every day and every dollar matters. It's probably much more like being a grower than it is working in a large company.
Mm-hmm.
You can't afford to have a lot of meetings. You can't afford to have a lot of bureaucracy. You can't afford to not have people getting along. You can't afford to not have people that'll carry out the trash or put together a lab bench. So it's really, I think, for me, it's fantastic to be a startup in the Midwest because that's a lot of our cultural identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not big egos, just about getting the work done, trying every day to move the ball forward in any way that you can. And
Mm-hmm.
if you can't find a way, through the mountain, you go around it or over it or under it, and you have plenty of other people who are willing to help you think it through. So
Mm-hmm.
that just makes for, it's a roller coaster, right? Because science is challenging and difficult. It doesn't always work. You can't always find the right talent. You never have the money you would like to have.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to be really pragmatic with every dollar that you spend because agriculture isn't like the pharmaceutical industry or AI or things where investors are just going to throw a boatload of money at it and expect some crazy returns. If
Mm-hmm.
anything, you don't want a boatload of money because you want people that are from the industry, that know about commodity prices and margins and recognize that you need to build a company, have a successful product that's done with the least amount of money and time possible to ensure it can get in the hands of a grower at what's going to be
Yeah.
attractive in the marketplace for their profitability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's as you're describing, I was like, oh, she's talking about my business. It sounds very much the same. And we're always have been bootstrapped, from the bottom up. And I think back to, and the reason I'm going to share just a little bit of our kind of backstory in the business of what now we call the Momentum Company, so that the people listening can hopefully get some idea like this, like how it is, right, from a leadership perspective, from a small business perspective. And there's a growing number of people in ag who are working for small businesses and startups and companies that are at risk of literally going under every quarter, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, a lot of it, we sort of depend on that paycheck, but you just never know. And your leadership often is probably protecting you from some of the dangers that are happening behind the scenes if they're good leaders. And, that this is how it goes. But I think back to the very beginning when I first set out in 2013 to create what our business is now today. And I just needed to generate at that time. My number, like my big nut, was $4,800 a month. That was what I needed to get. I needed $4,800 a month, and that could keep my family fed.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, because that was the base pay of the job that I left to go start my business.
Gotcha.
Right. So if I could just keep that, I could keep my wife happy. I could keep the kids fed. I could keep the mortgage and rent paid and all the good things that we had going on. That was it. Okay. And that was year one, and year one sucked. And I didn't even come close to that number, to be really
Oh,
honest with you. In fact, I
painful.
think it came up about halfway there, maybe just a little over halfway there. And then year two got better. right? And I tripled my revenue, and I got to,
Wow.
now I had a 6-figure business on my hands, right? And it felt better, but it's like, man, like now I'm running, I'm feeling pretty good. And then I went out that year and I tripled it again. Now we're up over 300,
Wow.
350,000 in revenue or something like that at the time. But now I've got so much going on that I'm missing meetings and I'm screwing up the schedule and I'm letting people down and I'm missing details on projects, just all the challenges that come with it. So, now I start hiring people. Now all of a sudden I'm all out of money again. And so, like, I share that transparently because I want people to understand, like, intentional leadership requires businesses to go through these exercises on the backside where you're constantly solving for that, and now fast forward 10 to 12, 13, 14 years later, right? We still have the same problems, right? It's just
Yeah.
that the numbers are bigger.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And
And more people dependent on you.
more
Yeah.
people, right? And what gets me up every day is I know, like, when I get up and go do my job, there are 21 children who get paid, whose parents get paid and keep their mortgages paid and keep food in their pantries because I get up and go get on sales calls every day, right?
Yeah, that's yeah, no kidding. Yeah,
Mhm.
and it's for me kind of I joke with my colleagues still in Big Ag. I said, I learned quickly when I first went on the startup side. It's not about walking down the hall to Treasury for a check. It's every day, worrying about making payroll and
Mhm.
balancing being transparent with a small group of employees so that you have an environment of candor and trust. But you also don't want young families,
Mhm.
panicking with the day-to-day panic that you're having about, trying to balance everything.
Yeah.
But you want to be honest and transparent. So, if they break your most important instrument, they're okay with telling you about it, right? And
Exactly.
if they think they
Exactly.
have a better idea for how to get the product to market or some feedback we're getting from a grower that we need to incorporate, you want that to all,
Mhm.
you can't waste somebody not having that conversation with you because they're afraid to.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's such an interesting environment that I think most people from an employee perspective maybe don't understand. So we're given a little bit of a look behind the curtain here. These are the things that intentional leaders, hopefully intentional leaders, are thinking about and working through. And it's balancing, like, how much should I say without worrying everybody about what's really going on. And by the way, some companies are doing extravagantly fine and they have incredibly healthy balance sheets and they have lots of assets. Most of them are called co-ops. Like, you're in the co, I've seen co-ops merge and get acquired, but I've never seen one go under.
That's a
Right.
great point.
And so they have, because why? Because they have lots and lots of assets and they have lots of invested, board members and customers and so on and so forth, where, for the most part, nobody knows who the momentum company is, right? Or what
Yeah,
Impetus
yeah,
is or what
great point.
Impetus is about. And so, we have, it's always an uphill battle. And so those are some of the things your leaders are dealing with. Or if you are a leader listening to this, like, hey, we see you.
Yeah, yeah.
We're here
But
for you.
I would give a shout out to the co-ops because we are
Mm-hmm.
now starting to see, and I'm, because of the consolidation in Big Ag and the lack of innovation that's happening there now,
Yeah.
it really does have to happen in the startups.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there isn't a lot of funding for ag startups. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a couple percent relative to the rest of the venture world.
Yeah.
And so co-ops have really stepped up and formed some of their own
Mm-hmm.
investment
Oh
vehicles
yeah.
in startups themselves. And so it's kind of
Yeah.
like growers taking direct responsibility for, the innovation pipeline critical to their future.
Yeah. I am so grateful for the cooperative system, to be honest with you. We wouldn't be here, without it. I mean, we were very focused on live events. We didn't have the podcast back in 2020, and we were having great years, year over year growth up until 2019 from a 2013 start. And then, we were hiring because it just seemed like we would just keep having, more and more growth. And then 2020 hit and it just went completely off a cliff. And so suddenly we got to let people go for the first time and really
Yeah,
and eventually ended up laying everybody off and starting it all over again. So
boy,
but it was
rough.
tough. But what did keep us going was ag retail was still getting up and going to work. And late 2020, some of them started writing checks to train their people again.
Boy,
And
fantastic.
hmm
Yeah, that
yep,
is
and that's
the
back when
lifesaver. Yeah.
it was a lifesaver for us, eventually for the business. And so I stay very loyal to to that group, day
Yeah.
over
It's
day.
not like they could stop producing food, which is both the good and the bad of it. I say, nobody really appreciates the risk a grower takes, the difficult decisions they have to make on up through the retail co-op system, back to the ag startup community, because they've never not delivered, right? We haven't had
Mhm.
empty shelves. The food has always been there.
Mhm.
So people just kind of take it for granted.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I joke with some people sometimes, but I'm like, do you realize how good we have it? And they're like, what do
Yeah.
you mean? Look at the news. It's all bad. Everything's bad. I said, what are you going to eat tonight?
Yeah.
And they look at me with a blank stare. I'm like, what are you going to eat tonight? I'm like, I don't know, probably whatever I want. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're not worried about that whether or not you're going to get to eat tonight.
Yeah.
You have a choice. Maybe you don't like what your wife is cooking tonight. You can go make something else in the fridge, or you don't like what's in the fridge today. You're like, well, or we can literally call somebody and they will bring the food to our house. From any restaurant you want.
Yeah. Hard problems to have, right? Yeah.
These are big first world problems that we have here in America. So, over the course of your career, Martha, what's been one of the biggest challenges that you've overcome?
Yeah. This will sound a little silly, but I was really fortunate to grow up with parents that you, there was just never a question about whether you could do anything, whether anything was possible, right? They grew up on
Mm.
farms in southern Wisconsin, mix of crop and livestock. And so, they just raised us, parents with three girls, that there was nothing that would stand in our way, that you just work hard and everything's possible. So,
Nice.
when I became, well, first in graduate school and then, in my career, it was just absolutely shocking. It shows how naive I was, but just absolutely shocking to me that everybody wouldn't always have the best intentions. That
Yeah.
some people were about themselves versus the product or the performance of the company. It just uh, it blows me away to this day. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, I'm work in a culture and a community where that doesn't exist for the most part. And whenever I run into it, it's just like, oh my word, I cannot believe it.
Yeah.
So I always, do a lot to try to help develop young people. And I always say, from day one, before you ever go to work, draw your line in the sand, and that line you won't cross, about your values, your morals,
Mhm.
whatever it may be, because it's a slippery slope, and you just got to draw that line, and you can't cross it.
Yep. It's really good advice. Really good, solid advice. What would you say has been one of your biggest wins?
Um, this is a this is a neat one. I joined Monsanto long ago, when it was a chemical company. It then bought NutraSweet, and it had the ag company. And the ag company was essentially Roundup. It was really, really struggling to come up with any new products. Biotech was still
Mm.
kind of an idea, right? It wasn't yet all commercial.
Hmm.
Excuse me. And so I was plucked out to be a part of a special initiative because of some of the innovative ways I was working in the lab. I had people working 24/7 to meet deadlines, and that was kind of unheard of in agricultural research. So I was just trying to get the job done. So because
Mhm.
of that, a man who became my boss for a long time, Rob Fraley, who went on to be the CTO of Monsanto,
Mhm.
pulled together a bunch of us from different areas and said, what are we going to do? We are not successful in developing any new products. And so we spent a lot of time working it through and addressing the problems. And it really was because the commercial organization and the R&D organization weren't working together.
Mm.
We didn't have it very clear on what the product was we were going to have to deliver and how we do it. And so we put in place crop teams. We were organized then by corn, cotton, soybeans. Those teams were cross-functional. They brought in commercial as well as all aspects of R&D with very rigorous timelines and reviews and grower advisory panels. And that structure ended up being incredibly successful, allowed for the great pipeline of products that Monsanto developed, specifically on the biotech side of things. And the structure, I would say, exists to this day, although with the acquisition of Bayer, that's changing a bit.
Yeah. Wow. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, you were right in there through the growth of, I mean, a really amazing time in agriculture.
Yeah, yeah,
Right at the center of it.
entirely, multi-billion-dollar industry,
Mm-hmm.
crop biotech created from nothing, right? It didn't
Yeah.
exist before.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Did you ever work with Glenn Stiff?
Yeah, sure I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were part of the same leadership team for the United States for a while. I was in the
Yeah.
Midwest, he was on the West. Yeah.
Very cool. Little side quest here, but I got introduced to him, and when I was really before I started this company, and he lived in Ankeny, Iowa, at least part of the year, and
Hmm.
I would drive through, and I would call him up and offer to buy him lunch. And if you buy Glenn lunch and a couple glasses of Chardonnay, he will coach you on anything you want coaching on. So I made him into my sales mentor.
Oh,
And
that's
everything I learned
great.
about salesmanship pretty much came from Glenn, and he would make introductions and so forth, and even, loan me a little when I needed to get some things going back in the early days of the business, and we always paid that back and had a good relationship there. So,
Boy, that's great.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that was my Glenn Stiff story.
Yeah,
So,
great mentor,
mhm.
completely committed to agriculture, right?
Yeah, and still is to this day,
Hmm.
as much as I can tell. I think that's good for folks to know, though. Just I'm assuming, hopefully, there was some folks along the way that were mentors for you, who was really impactful to you in your career.
Yeah. Well, I can't point to anyone because, right, it takes a lot of people with somebody as challenging as me. So, again, as I mentioned, incredibly fortunate to have my parents.
Hmm.
My dad was a math teacher, but a scientist. He's the one that kind of instilled in me the love for science and helped me
Mm.
with those experiments, as did my grandfather, who, both of them were military veterans, and both of them, taught for me kind of that love of agriculture and production. And then I was fortunate to have my first boss when I was an intern between undergrad and grad school at Monsanto. He took me under his wing, and this lovely St. Louis community, he remains a friend and a mentor today. He's actually a
Hmm.
partner in the same fund that I'm a separate partner in, a
Hmm.
cultivation capital ag fund. And he's on a life science fund. So we get together and try to help continue to develop people. And then, as I mentioned, Rob Fraley, my boss for a long time, CTO of Monsanto for a long time, clearly quite an innovator. I say he's still my boss because I still get assignments from him, but he's also there to help me just think through, the company. He's actually an investor in my company,
Hmm.
and, willing to give you tough love, help you think through any of the challenges, and always
Hmm.
has you thinking, five steps ahead of where you were. If
Yeah.
there's 1,000 ways to approach a problem, he'll come up with 1,000 ideas, but then he'll be very good about picking the two or three paths that move it forward. So
Wow.
I'm very fortunate to just have a lot of people, help me throughout my career, my life and my career. Not to
I
mention
bet.
my husband. Better mention him.
Yeah. Well, it's no wonder that you've had such a historic career being surrounded by great people, and yeah, that's always my encouragement to folks that are listening is to pay attention to those who have had some success. What are the things that they do? As Tony Robbins says, success leaves clues, and it's important to pay attention and having mentors and surrounding yourself with good people is a really essential thing that you'll find most successful people. Martha here, obviously included in that mix. So, pay attention to that. Find out how to implement that in your own situation wherever you are. What would you say is from a who yeah from a leadership standpoint? Talk about the value of vulnerability.
Mhm. Yeah, we talked about it a little bit earlier in that,
Hmm.
if you go around acting like you got everything handled, you kind of instill that in everyone else in your team, or as I said, kind of the virtual community that you work in, versus if you're able to share the challenges and the difficulties that you're up against. First of all, you open yourself up to other people who have had experiences who can be helpful to you. But you also then create an environment where other people feel free to admit the same. And instead of sitting there and struggling and trying to get through something, you can help them, get through it much more quickly and effectively, and certainly to not be alone.
Yeah. I think, you not directly said it, but kind of batted around it the whole time that we've been on here. And it's when the team has a mission, and that mission is meaningful to the team, whatever that mission is, and we're clear on what that mission is. Like, we can be vulnerable around the problem, right? So like when we can isolate the problem and we know what the problem is, and we can sit here and say, hey, I actually don't know. Like, I can sit here today, and I've had this conversation with my team. Like, listen, somehow over the next 36 months, we're building a $10 million ARR business. That's the goal, right? That's the mission. That's the big hairy goal that I put out there, the big hairy audacious goal, the BHAG as they call it, that I put out there for a team. Today, the reality is we're about 20% of that. Okay. I don't know exactly what's going to happen in the economy and what exactly is going to happen in ag and how that needs to be framed up, or how we need to restructure, or who we need to hire. But that's where we're going. And let's all put our heads together and come up with some ideas and develop a strategy. And then we'll go attempt that strategy. And some of it will work and some of it won't. And that's going to be okay. And then we're going to tweak what, maximize or optimize what's working, and otherwise tweak the strategy. Like, how does that sound to you guys? Everybody's like,
Yeah.
okay, that sounds pretty good. Like, at least he's not waiting. They're not waiting for me to tell them what to do, which is the worst case scenario, because we're big enough where I don't have time to tell everybody. I can't manipulate everybody to get them to do everything I need them to do. I need people to think for themselves.
Yeah. If you don't set the goal, you'll never get there.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, what book or podcast or resource would you point someone to if they could only choose one or two?
One or two. Well, so probably because I work to try to help a lot of people in the startup community. There's just a great book. It's an old book, but it's called Venture Deals by Feld and Mendelsohn. It's really just a great book. It's been reprinted a number of times. On the other spectrum, if I just think of books that have stood with me my whole life, maybe because I'm a scientist, I really like economists and how they're able to make just structure out of madness or disorder. And so had a professor once called Russ Roberts at Washington University. He's moved on from there. I don't know where he is right now, but he wrote a fable. It's called The Choice, and it's about free trade. And it's just a really nice way to learn, and it just makes it so simple. Then if I think about of course, Doris Kearns Goodwin's, I'd read anything she writes, because she makes you feel like you've gotten to know every president she has. And then Malcolm Gladwell would be another one with The Tipping Point. Right?
You bet. That's a great one. That's a good one right there. I like that. So we take these book recommendations that are given by our guests, and we add them to our library. So one of the things we've created at the Momentum Company is a product called Jericho. And so what we can do with it is actually write hyper-personalized growth plans for each individual on someone's team. And so based on the capabilities that person or that employee needs in order to be excellent at their job, Jericho makes book recommendations, podcast recommendations, and course recommendations. And so there's everything from free to $20 books to paid courses that it recommends. And so that's one of the big projects we're working on. That's part of our big goal that we're working on as we march into the future. And it's only available to our Momentum Company membership, actually.
Wow,
so it's kind of a cool way. But we always take those book recs and then we train Jericho to know what those are. And then if that matches up with the capability, say someone's working on business leadership and venture deals would be relevant to them, or if Tipping Point from a leadership thought perspective would be relevant to someone's development, it'll recommend that as a book that they could buy. And they literally just click the link and it takes them to Amazon to go buy it.
Neat.
So yeah, kind of a neat little resource that we built for our clients to help them get clear. Because a lot of people know that they need to do a better job of training their people, but don't always know what training they need. That's a problem that I've discovered over the years that that leaders have, and so we've helped to solve for that a little bit. So, but Martha, anything else that we can share with the group, with the Intentional Ag audience as we bring it in for a close?
Yeah, just appreciate the invitation. Love thinking that you've got an audience of all the people I care about in agriculture out there. We're going to work hard to develop and deliver new products to you, and appreciate, as always, your receptivity to that. We have an investor in the company, Carl Peterson, who actually owns Peterson Seeds, the largest regional seed company. He and his wife, Jewell, came through here on their motorcycle a few months ago, just sat down and spent hours with us on the progress of Impetus and giving us advice. In fact, the idea we have for topical traits actually came from Carl. So,
oh, wow.
Listening to that grower community, the co-op, the retail distributor structure, or anybody that has suggestions and ideas for me for how we can do this better and deliver some great insect control solutions to you, I'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. All right. Well, you guys know how to reach out. You can reach her through us here at the Momentum Company, or what is the website, Martha, for people to go check it out?
Impetus Ag.
ImpetusAg.com?
Yeah.
There you go. All right, guys, go check it out. And Martha, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for the opportunity, Mark. Best of luck to you.
Thanks, you too.